we face a really existential threat to our security. This is the most dangerous time in Britain, since the 1930s, I would say. And we are absolutely failing to get to grips with this. And everyone listening to this programme should be really alarmed about that.
Here's a headline from The Times. Cameron under pressure to punish Putin oligarchs. The article says that MPs and diplomatic experts are urging David Cameron to act against businessmen close to President Putin's regime. Except the article isn't from now, it's from 2014, when Cameron was Prime Minister and Putin was supporting Ukrainian separatists. 10 years later, and with much of Ukraine now under Russian control, the now Foreign Secretary David Cameron says there should be consequences on Putin for the death of Alexei Navalny. But after 10 years, what can the West do that will really hurt Vladimir Putin and his cronies? Edward Lucas is a journalist, Russia expert, and author of Deception, Spies, Lies, and How Russia Dupes the West. He joins us now. Good morning, Edward.
Morning, Steve.
It does feel like we've talked tough as a country about Russia for several years, and we're now bearing the consequences of not actually acting toughly.
Yes, that's exactly right. I would say that we've talked tough lately. Before that, we were just wallowing in the trough. Our bankers, lawyers and accountants and other professional services firms were just luxuriating in the enormous amounts of money they could make from servicing the Russian super rich. And that was actually one of Navalny's things. The last time I spoke to him when I was in London, I said, "Are you anti-Western?" He said, "Well, I'm anti-Western because it's in the West that the people who are looting my country are laundering their money." And we still haven't got to grips with that, I'm afraid, despite Ukraine, despite everything else, that there's a great black hole in the heart of Britain, which is the way in which our most distinguished, best educated, most reputable people drop their principles when some rich foreigner turns up.
Do you think that even in the last 2 years, that's true? That there's this question that have the sanctions that have followed on from the invasion of Ukraine, because we're talking about what we're going to do now Alexei Navalny has died, but do you think there's the sanctions that have been imposed on Putin and his cronies have worked in any way? Have they shown any measure of effectiveness?
I mean, I think we have to be clear. The real Russian opposition is not what's left of Navalny's organization in Russia, and it's not any of the other admirable and sometimes less admirable people who are trying to make a mark there. The real Russian opposition is the armed forces of Ukraine. That's our only hope of dealing with the Putin regime. And by far the most important thing we can do is to give Ukraine the weapons it needs. I think there's a separate question about our own self-respect and the integrity of our system.
Yeah.
And we should deal with that. And I think there are also questions about sanctions, that what we are failing to do is to get to grips with the enablers, the people who allow Russia and other sanctioned countries to bust the sanctions. And there's a great deal we could do on that. And in fact, I've written for the Times about it.
It's a good question, that, isn't it? Because I remember when Ukraine first happened, there's a lot of tough talk about Russia's economy is going to be crippled. We can use sanctions in a way that absolutely can affect political change in Russia. But the lessons of sanctions, it strikes me generally, look at Iran as well. Sanctions can always be got around while there are countries in the world willing to do business with those countries.
Yes, I mean, the trouble with sanctions is it's a kind of mixture of happy talk and displacement activity.
Yeah.
You say, oh, well, yeah, if we chuck Russia off the world banking system, they've completely collapsed. So therefore, we don't need to spend money on defence or worry about our allies. And in fact, we chucked Russia out of SWIFT mostly, and nothing much happened. So there's a huge amount of wishful thinking. And it's also a substitute for doing what we actually need to do. It's much easier to say we'll issue a very cross press release and put the governor of the prison in which Navalny was murdered on some list so that he can't come to the West anymore. But actually, this is just pinpricks. It's gesture politics and doesn't make a difference.
And just finally, Edward, how confident can you possibly be? Obviously, everything that comes out of Russia is shrouded in misinformation. It's hard to know anything for certain. Are you as certain as you can be that Navalny was murdered at the hands of the Russian state? Can we be as concrete as that?
I don't think we should be devoting any time to this. Actually, I mean, he was in a punishment cell for I think he spent a third of his time in prison. He shouldn't have been in prison anyway. But I think that we are sort of fretting about the minutiae of the Russian system, rather than looking at the real dimensions of the fact we face a really existential threat to our security. This is the most dangerous time in Britain, since the 1930s, I would say. And we are absolutely failing to get to grips with this. And everyone listening to this programme should be really alarmed about that.
Well, it's not nice for people to hear, but I think it's important that we all hear it. Edward, good to speak to you. Thank you for joining us. Edward Lucas there. He also writes regularly for The Times about matters Russian.